And I want to thank everyone for carving out time from their busy days to join us, number one. And then number two, tell you what we're hoping to accomplish today. I've shared with many of my clients who are here in the room that one of the beliefs that we have at Hollencrest is that we are in the midst of a software-driven revolution right now, where software is changing every aspect of our daily lives, whether it's how we communicate, how we travel, how we conduct business, how we do transactions, and of course, how we meet our significant others if you're not old school like me. So what's interesting about Sway Ventures is we've had a relationship with them for the last couple of years, and one of their, I don't know if you'd call it a tagline, but statements on their website is that software is liberating us from the tyranny of inefficiency. And that statement kind of says a lot with a few words, but it encompasses what we believe as well. And so our objective today, thanks to Brian and Bill's hospitality, is we're going to have a nice lunch and get a chance to acquaint ourselves with one another, but we've also got a panel of some very talented industry professionals with extensive experience both in transactions and companies themselves in this space. And we're going to explore some of the specific ways that we believe software is disrupting industry today, but most importantly, trends we see for the future. And so ideally, when we walk out of here at 2 o'clock, we'll have some more insights and maybe be provoked into looking at the world slightly differently and how software is going to play a role in that. So at this juncture, I want to introduce Brian and give you an opportunity to say a few words and tell us your outlook.
I will. That was impressive, you talking over the light jazz in the restaurant.
I figured you would prefer that versus me singing today, okay?
Yeah. Did we order this music?
17 more beers, please.
Well, thanks for coming, you guys, friends of Hollencrest. As Rob said, I think we are in a pretty interesting point in the journey where we're watching software get involved and play a pretty crucial role in every industry. I was with somebody over the weekend, just a family friend, and they said, well, it's not, they're in the agricultural business, and they said, well, it's not really touching agricultural yet. And I said, you bet it is. There's a lot going on in agriculture in terms of how we're predicting yields, of crops, regulating the water flow, to water crops, getting onto commodities trading platforms that are digital to sell it. People are starting to use cryptocurrencies to acquire produce, et cetera. So I don't think there's any industry that you could be involved in that's not being sort of transformed by software. You read a lot about AI and artificial intelligence. We were talking earlier about, back in the late 70s, I can remember, first hearing about AI, and back then it was sort of a NASA, contemplation of searching for extraterrestrial life. Well, now it's not so esoteric because AI software does exist today. The technology is being embedded in just about anything. So conversations we have with Rob and with Greg and their team about what's interesting to put capital to work into, both in the public and private markets. There are actually actionable investment opportunities leveraging artificial intelligence. So I think one of our objectives today is to hopefully give you guys a better feel for this whole software-driven economy, and also give you some actionable intelligence that you can use to better take advantage of AI, both as a consumer, as a business owner, and an investor. And so we've assembled, we think, a pretty compelling panel of experts to help talk us through that. And we hope to make this interactive, so as you guys have questions or comments or points of view, even if they differ from the folks on the panel, don't be bashful. And that's what we have on tap for today. I think we're going to have my co-founder at Sway Ventures, Bill Malloy, come up and kick things off with a little bit of a talk, just to provide some top-level perspective for us on the State of the Union. Yeah, great.
All right. Well, yeah, Brian, thank you very much. I've been tasked with trying to communicate a TED Talk I did years ago with no visuals behind me. So I brought one visual, which I'll share with you in a little bit. I'll start off with a little bit of a quiz. So I'm sure you've read Time Magazine, and they name a Person of the Year every year. Anyone know in 1982 who they named as the Person of the Year? AI? It was actually a computer, if you can believe that. And I think a part of it is it's just shocking that if you kind of put ourselves back in 1982 to kind of think about that. And there's this trend that I'll talk about that talks about the exponential growth. And if you think about a chessboard, if you take a grain of rice or a grain of wheat and you double it as you go through the chessboard, you really don't start to hit exponential growth until you hit the second half of the chessboard. So here's my visual. Once you get to the end of the chessboard, you've reached 18 quintillion, which is phenomenal to think about how large that number is in terms of grains of rice or grains of wheat. And put that in perspective, it would actually wrap the Earth twice. So there's this concept of exponential growth that we at Sway Ventures think that software, we really are only in the second half of the chessboard, to think back to 1982, that we're really just now starting to hit this exponential growth. And the funny thing is, when I went back and looked at this TED Talk, it was years ago, but it's still really the same themes that we're investing in today. So pervasive connectivity is number one. This idea that everything's connected, right? Whether it's your Apple Watch, your doorbell, the light that we went by coming here, so pervasive connectivity. Back then I called it big data, but it really is transformed into machine learning. Big data was overused, 8 years ago. Now machine learning is overused, and all machine learning is doing is taking data, getting it clean, and trying to add some sort of learning on top of it. And then finally, this idea of kind of platform. So it's this idea that old line industries are going to be disrupted, whether it's healthcare or manufacturing. So we think those are going to be the three big themes that are going to drive this kind of exponential growth, and why I think we're dedicating our lives to investing in software. So I'll walk everyone through a few examples of exponential growth just as we start to tie this in the panel that we're going to have. So Ray Kurzweil is a Google employee. He's spent his career doing a number of different things, but the overarching theme is, I'll call it horizontal machine learning. He's applied that in music, he's applied it in the genome, he's now applying it at Google, and it's something that we wrestle with internally at Sway Ventures, vertical versus horizontal. And he gives a great example. If those of you remember, back when they were sequencing the genome, it was a 15-year project that cost $1 billion. And another pop quiz. So they're halfway through the project, 7.5 years through the project. How much of the project do you think they completed in a percentage basis? 5? 5? 20? All right. 1%, if you can believe that, right? So it's this idea, and everyone was doubting them. And he was one of the guys saying, look, it's a part of the investment that we have to make before we hit this exponential growth. They ended up completing the project. It was, if you can imagine, it was $1 billion budget. They completed it on budget, and it was in the 15-year time horizon. So you have this idea of machine learning and how exponential growth really impacted sequencing the genome. Those of you remember Deep Blue, IBM's computer, right? Deep Blue actually played a renowned chess player and beat him twice. I think it was in the 80s, same time period. And this was like the first evolution of machine learning, except for it was this entire restaurant filled with computers, which we can now do on my iPad. So what he did was he then went and took that and said, okay, what can I do to try to take advantage of this exponential growth or this exponential learning that we have with Deep Blue, and how can I apply that to chess? And it was one of the first things that we started to apply kind of this man-machine symbiosis, which was, there's human intellect that I think we're still firm believers that in the next 20 years, you're still going to have a person that sits over machine learning and AI, that there's just, you're still going to need that person that sits over the top, but some of the more mundane tasks will be solved through software. So he ended up combining advanced chess, which was software and a person, ended up beating Deep Blue the next year. So you've got another example of this exponential growth and being able to leverage software. And I want to draw, the third and final comparison, which is what we see at Sway Ventures. So I got a great story from someone in the audience. I turned $100,000 into multi-million dollars. We always love those stories. To me, those are the spidering effects you see in these deals, and we see it at Sway Ventures. So I was an early investor in Palantir. Brian has built a number of companies in cyber and infrastructure, and what you see are these kind of clusters of entrepreneurs. So I'll use Palantir as an example. Came from PayPal, started Palantir. Now at Sway Ventures, I think we probably backed 5 spinouts out of Palantir. We sold one to Salesforce for just shy of $500 million. And what you find are these founders tend to cluster together. And it's like this exponential growth that when you get inside of a great company like Palantir, you get inside of Facebook, these groups of people tend to move, but then they train the next generation and they spider and cluster. And we're now seeing it in our deal flow. Like we probably get 2,000 qualified deals a year that we have to vet through. And there are 6 different avenues on how we source deals, but this is just one of them. But it's great to see exponential growth happening in successful companies. And I'm sure a lot of you that own operating businesses have seen this as well. So I think it's going back to the beginning. It's really just a precursor for us to think about this kind of big push in machine learning and AI that we're all hearing about. I think we're just moving into this component of exponential growth, and we've only kind of gone past the first half of the chessboard. So I think I'm excited for us to share with our panelists and to share the interaction with you to talk about what that next half looks like over the next 25 years. So I think with that, maybe get our esteemed panelists up here, and we'll have hopefully a thought-provoking conversation. So I think as we go through this, we'll ask questions of the audience, but I think also as we're going through it, the point of this is very casual and really just a way to educate the audience. So Brian, maybe I'll hand it over to you to kick it off.
Yeah, sure. So I think, there's sort of, I guess, a couple aspects to this. As we talked about earlier, one is just from a top-down sense, how software is impacting industry, and then I think we'll dovetail in the artificial intelligence side of things, because a lot of people ask questions of us, geez, if AI really takes off, am I going to be out of a job? That's a pretty common one. Elon Musk was quoted as saying that us humans are going to turn into big fat house cats. You're just going to sit there watching TV. Alexa, get me a pizza. Alexa, get me this. So I think there's a lot of existential questions people have about. Yeah, please. Yeah, we will. Alan, I'm going to throw that one to you because you've got.
It's a term that has a different meaning depending upon what period of time you're talking about. But if you talk about now, most people think about artificial intelligence equates to machine learning, which is a broad area of statistical tools, but really it relates to artificial neural networks. So it's extracting out of data information without explicitly programming it.
Yeah. And I think jumping around a little bit, but maybe what we do, just Alan, while we have you, would you mind just giving your quick background, and then we'll go down the panel.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's see. Where do I start? So I'm a neuroscientist. My training is actually in medicine, medical school, and I've been interested in artificial intelligence since about the 80s. And so I've studied this for a long time, and I've had several companies that were in software. When I sold my last company, I went back to the university, UCSD, and worked on the newer form of artificial intelligence, and that led to me forming a company called Brain Corporation, which develops artificial intelligence for robotics.
I think
Kim, go ahead.
I was just going to say,
give your background.
Background,
Yeah.
got it. Okay, so Kim Walpole, my company's Trials.AI. My background is actually in organizational development, so I worked with tier 1 pharma companies for about 12 years. This is my 3rd company, and we are leveraging artificial intelligence to accelerate clinical trials. So I just wanted to give some context because I've had an opportunity to talk quite a bit with folks that aren't in the AI space, and I think AI tends to be really scary, especially when you use the word artificial, right? We're suddenly like, it's fake, it doesn't work, it's something, there's something bad. And I think, if we can maybe look at it rather than artificial as supplemental intelligence, that would give you a better idea of where we're at, instead of, there's this general AI that we're not even close to yet. We're actually, computers are working like human beings, and then there's super AI where like computers take over the world. But the context that we're working in today is narrow AI. And I think to Alan's point, very specific use cases for that. So I have a friend who's done several AI companies, and he says, you know what, AI really, bottom line, if it works right, is called software. And so I think that that's one of the things that I often think about when I'm talking about AI and giving the confine.
Good. Ken, we want to go through an introduction and then.
Yeah, thank you. I've been a serial tech CEO. Started off on the finance side of big company world, BA, CPA, industrial relations, all that kind of stuff. But I eventually wandered into operations and building cellular companies, cable companies. Last many years, last most recent lives, I've taken a couple of public companies public. So I've run global public companies. Most recently, I co-founded with 6 research professors from UCSD a company called Emotion, which was basically sort of leveraging their brilliance in cognitive and behavioral science, computer vision, and machine learning, deep learning to measure facial expression from which you can infer emotion. That company was bought by Apple in the first quarter of 2016. So when you get that, one of the many applications is when you get the iPhone X, that Face ID in there. That's my team who all are up at Apple now. I don't think I think you guys did a great job of explaining what AI is. I think what you hear about, what you hear about that causes people to be confused is people extrapolating where it will go, and we're a long ways from in the meantime, there's more as it transforms, as we transform how we work and live and how business is done, and it's going to touch a lot of people's lives in a lot of different ways. So we'll get into that, but very powerful force. But we are hundreds of years away from, if ever. And whenever I say hundreds of years, you can take that as to mean I'm skeptical. We're hundreds of years away from consciousness. Meantime, there's an awful lot of good that will happen, and we're all going to spend some time talking about the implications, both bad and good. Well, one observation I would make is that there's the balance, the way this works in our lives. We make decisions about when it's valuable enough for us to participate or play or give up some element of privacy to get some level of benefit. If you go back to 12 years ago, most of us were probably extremely uncomfortable with putting our credit cards on the internet.
Even passwords, right?
Even passwords. Now, even though we know about the breaches and the potential risk, we see the upside reduction of friction, the convenience that we get from doing that versus the potential risk, and we just decided it's worth it, so we move forward. I think, there's going to be money made in allowing us to protect some modicum of privacy or make a decision about how much privacy we will be made. So some companies will solve that problem. But I think that the concept of privacy is an evolving one, and most of us are finding out there's not a lot of it.
It's interesting that you say that because in healthcare, this is a big conversation that's happening. I mean, in clinical trials, there's always, everything rises and falls on patient privacy, right, PHI. But you'd be surprised to know that from the patient perspective, there are a lot more people, I think to your point, that are saying, hey, if it can help me get better, I'm happy to share, data that may improve a certain process or get me, healthier or something like that. And so I think, some of the things that we've talked about on the healthcare side in terms of the future is this democratization of healthcare data and putting the power in the hands of the individual to decide what data they want to share at what point in time. So I see that as, a next 5-10 year kind of process, but I think that gives us a little bit more power.
Yeah, well, I think you asked two questions, right? What happens to us, and then there's the privacy side of it. And I want to kind of tackle the first part to it and hand it back to Brian. The what happens to us, there's some interesting stats to throw out. I mean, I think you can argue that over time that 40 to 50%, just in the US, 40 to 50% of the workforce, like their jobs are actually at risk because of automation, whether it's AI, machine learning, or just general automation. And then, but there's a savings that's 16 to 30 trillion dollars in efficiency gains that you can get. That again, I think it's software, it's machine learning, it's other things that are impacting this. So I think we'd all be naive in our own businesses to not think ahead and to think about how we can train people, how we can invest, how that is going to shift. Whether it's, we were having a conversation earlier in real estate, I was on with a potential customer in a deal who's like, I hate FedEx and UPS because they cost more than my goods cost just to transport it. So I think you have to look forward to the future as we think about job creation, job growth, and how it impacts old line industries. And I think, Brian, you were gonna talk a little bit about kind of Elon Musk and some of the things as we think about population growth, employment, and job growth.
Yeah, we'll give you, for those of you that don't know Sway Ventures as well, we're a venture capital firm, and we're ostensibly investing in software-driven businesses, companies that make software. They may have a modicum of hardware that goes with it, and I'll give you a good example. Bill and I just led a financing in a company called Fetch Robotics. And it's a company founded in Silicon Valley by some very accomplished roboticists who, basically had a point of view that robots could be used for warehouse automation. And the concept is, you think of a warehouse as a confined space, unlike autonomous vehicles where the government is going to regulate the utilization and permitting and licensing and trafficking of autonomous vehicles. If I'm DHL and I have 1,000 warehouses, government can't really touch what happens inside it. There's OSHA in case somebody drops a pallet on their foot. So these guys said, hey, look, human beings are really for most warehouses, there's human beings in warehouses moving forklifts and pallet jacks and boxes around. There is some warehouse automation, like Amazon bought a company a few years ago called Kiva Systems, which automates some of the job in the warehouse. But so what Fetch did is they built some robots that are, basically can very simply go pick up packages off of a truck, off of a conveyor belt, off of a shelf, and drop it onto a loader, drop it onto a forklift, et cetera. And it was funny because we got into this existential question of, well, what about the poor guy whose job that used to be? So are you just trying to replace that guy? And there is, to Bill's point, half of the jobs in many industries, I don't think they disappear, I just think they change. And here's a good example. There's the cynical person that would say, well, hey, a robot doesn't need a cigarette break or a 401k or a sick day. It doesn't even need a wage, it doesn't need health benefits, like it just does the job until it runs out of steam, right? So there is an inherent, OpEx benefit to doing that. But actually, warehouses are very unsafe places. When I was 18 years old, I drove a forklift in a massive HP warehouse, and about 3 times a week, a piece of heavy machinery and a human being would collide. And it's not pretty what happens. So there actually is a safety concern for people. There's also a speed concern. Maybe humans are built to move the package off of the conveyor belt onto the loader, but it would take me 10 times longer to get to the other side of the warehouse than a robot that's flying along. And so the question is, okay, great. How does the robot have the intelligence to know how to grab that parcel and how to find its way across the warehouse to drop it off without running into something? The answer is artificial intelligence. That's actually what's powering the use of these robots. They're in DHL's warehouses, Target's warehouses, and they're in pilots with Walmart and some other large companies that you know. So that's an example of something that Sway is investing in that's providing innovation into an industry that we could all relate to on some level, using artificial intelligence. And Alan, I wanted to ask you, and because you've been at the forefront on the research and the product side, it's an example of an industry that you're touching right now where you see artificial intelligence making some sort of a leap as far as industry goes.
Well, sure. Our solutions go into commercial cleaning machines. So if you would go to large retail stores, malls, airports, things like that, you'll see them going around and cleaning them. Most of it's done at night after hours, but our machines operate with humans there as well. It's just a lot of the cleaning is actually done after hours. So that's in our particular circumstance what we decided to go after. And it's interesting. It does have some, I don't know fetch robotics that well, but it does have some similarities, is that we decided that indoor navigation was an interesting problem. Right. That was really not regulated the way self-driving cars are, and that we could get solutions into customers' hands now, whereas self-driving cars are probably 10, 20 years off.
Right. Yeah, and that's
part of driving it.
And that's a great, your example, Alan, is a great example of, particularly, I'm on the board of Costco, and so they have a philosophy that, basically close down the warehouses in the sort of off hours. They don't actually think it's great for people to work, all those other shifts. So when you don't have people in the warehouse, they would typically have contractors come in and do this back-breaking work of trying to clean the floors, And when you think about a robot being able to do what's really a horrible job, I mean, let's face it, it doesn't add much value to anybody's life. And robots do it much better and don't actually do as much damage, because the LiDAR, the ability with computer vision to sort of exactly go where they need to go and spend as much time as they need to spend to get things clean, it's it. So I think this is an example of that trade-off, where the kinds of jobs that robots in some cases can take on is work that, frankly, no human should have to do as a way to earn a living. So,
yeah, the interesting thing, touching on this concept, which I know we're going to get into, of the loss of jobs or displacement of jobs. We initially thought a lot about that, but then we started getting calls from people who said they just couldn't simply find people to do the work, which was really interesting to us. That these janitorial services said, well, we have to go to robots because nobody else wants to do this work.
And high turnover, right? High training cost.
Right. High turnover and a lot of workman's comp injuries, and people were getting injured, falling off of these things, slipping on things. And so it was like, some of the things that we really didn't envision that. But I think what we always tell our customers is, we're not really doing this so that you can turn around and fire a lot of people. But there's just a lot of things that can be done to maintain these spaces. And if they're focused on this very manual task that is repetitive, is probably not the best use of a person. So a lot of people will, what we say is take them to more high value tasks. So we really don't talk about eliminating jobs. We just talk about taking that same kind of workforce and doing more intelligent things with them, or things that humans only can do today.
Ken and I were talking about this in the car today, but I think it's going to be a two-part question, part to Kim, part to Ken. There's this idea of vertical machine learning / AI, and then horizontal machine learning and AI, and I think you'll start to read more and more about this. I want to go through kind of a definition and example. So for us, if I talk about it from a Sway Ventures standpoint, we don't view machine learning and AI as a sector. it's kind of these themes that I talked about when I was referencing the TED Talk. You've got pervasive connectivity, there's a theme, machine learning and AI is a theme. It impacts everything, cyber, smart enterprise, transportation and logistics. So we've seen it in Uber when we invested in them. We've seen it in Fetch Robotics. Those are transportation and logistics companies. We've seen it in companies like atTrials.AI in healthcare, Rome Analytics, which is helping improve clinical trials. We've seen it in consumer technologies. I was given the example, we've invested in a former team from Nest that just announced a new product called Nugent. If you haven't had a chance, go check it out. That's my plug for the day. But Kim, could you talk about kind of the vertical component and how you apply that at Trials and why it matters? And then Ken, maybe educate everyone on the horizontal side of it.
Sure. So trials are currently a very, very manual process. In order to get an effective treatment to market, there are a series of studies that have to be taken, that have to be undertaken under FDA and/or regulatory approval. It takes like 15 years to get a drug to market, costs around-ish $1 billion. And there are a lot of logistical bottlenecks and things that are really difficult. And one of the things that we found initially was that there's all of this data that all of these large pharmaceutical companies have that have in-house, but they're not using it. They're not leveraging it to make smart decisions in conducting clinical trials. So it's kind of like dark data. Nobody uses it, but it's there. We own it. So our thought was, how can we leverage historical data around clinical trials to make better predictions around how to run better trials? So there's a study design process when you're running clinical trials, and that is essentially, I got to come up with a roadmap that the FDA and/or regulatory group approves of in order for me to engage in a clinical trial. Well, how do they do that today? These, I call them the white coats, get into a room, they go to the NIH website, they download paper, and then they highlight those papers to determine how they're going to run their next study. And we were like, my mind is blown with the advancements in healthcare over the last 40 years. Why are we still getting clinical trials together using paper, binders, forms, and pens? Why are we doing this? And so our application really is coming in and saying, let's leverage previous data around successful and not successful clinical trials to help create a context around better study design, creating a better study. And then once we've determined what a great study is, how do we feed it into a really smart, intelligent workflow automation kind of tool that enables all of the various stakeholders in a clinical trial to engage with that trial?
So for the white coats that you're talking about that are doing that process,
yeah.
Is your product or what you deliver to them usually help them save money, save time, or deliver a better, faster result to get the actual drug approved?
That's a great question. So it is a money-saving venture, so I can give you an example of that. We've got a device company that came to us, and they said, we're a startup, we just raised several $1 million to run some early studies. We've gone out and tried to engage some consultants that are called CROs in the space. And they went out, the lowest, they were trying to do like a 50-person study. The lowest cost was $750,000, highest $2.7 million. And they came to us and said, we actually want to take this in-house and we want to run this study ourselves. Can we use your platform to completely bypass the CRO and do this ourselves? And we said, absolutely, that's how we built it. So they saved, at minimum, around $500,000. How we speed that entire process up is in determining who are the best people to engage in the study. It takes around 12 to 18 months to come up with that study design. We can do that in weeks.
I think I can actually, the task that Bill assigned me to, and answer that question. There is a kind of holy grail next level search going on for the ability to go horizontally, we'll call it, across major verticals or major areas. And there's this concept of unsupervised data, being able to take unsupervised data, that is, to take data from, I'll just throw out some examples, genomics, data from geology, data from weather, data from farming, just for example. I'm not talking anything specifically. And having a system take this data from historical data and find patterns that we could never find ourselves. We just could never. There was no way to visualize it, no way to sort of to encompass this amount of data. It just is impossible. And find patterns that would lead to ability to predict things that we can't even, maybe to predict what kind of infrastructure we need in the future. So that's something that Google and a bunch of other people are looking at, is how do you take this unsupervised data from a lot of different places and begin to look for patterns that would be helpful and predictable. That is a major push. It will be groundbreaking. It may take quantum computing to give us the enabling technology to actually be able to handle that. And but to answer your last yes, agree completely. And to answer your question about is the U.S. the best place? I mean, the U.S. and Silicon Valley still, in my humble opinion, is still the critical mass of great ideas. And the reason it is because it's the critical mass of capital, at least today. That could change going forward, but at least today. Probably the biggest risk to us as a country in terms of losing our position as the innovators is probably China, because AI is all about data. If you look at the amount of data that's generated in China on a daily basis just through cell phones, it's enormous. If you look at what Alibaba did and what the equivalent of its, what do you call it, Black Friday, it was, it just blows the United States away. It blows they did 10 times what we do as a country, or some crazy number like that. I don't remember the exact number, but just the amount of data that's generated in a country that size with people participating is probably our biggest challenge.
For sure. 100% it is. And I think, Ken touching on the threat side of it, and I think, if you go to your basic SWOT analysis, completely agree. I think it's one of the biggest threats. I think there are also some major opportunities with friendlies. Yeah. So, what we've seen, I echo what Ken's saying, and that Silicon Valley, I think, will remain, the heart of innovation. We spend a lot of time with our global network, and I think it's a sentiment that everyone shares. Engineering talent, capital, culture, right? Opportunities, I think, are some specific regions that may or may not seem obvious. Stockholm, Berlin, London, they have their own economic issues, but very, very strong engineering talent. I think when you look at tax regulation, if you look at how they're investing in the infrastructure, actually have the ability to innovate with companies, or we call it cross-border arbitrage, bring U.S. companies there, and also invest in companies that are on the ground there. You can get them at cheaper valuations and then bring them over here to the U.S. for commercialization. So I think that's a part of the opportunity that we're 100%. So much so that we now have, it's probably 4 operating partners, 1 general partner that we've hired based there. 20% of our portfolio on our next fund will be based there. No. That will be based in friendlies, London, Berlin, Stockholm. I think China, to me, is more the threat component, and you've got to be on the ground, boots on the ground, and have to have a very unique entry angle, and have to be willing to deal with the political regime that's there.
So to that point, let's give a little bit of a plug. Bill, we've been leading a charge at Sway around universities. USC, Stanford and University of Washington. That's my plug. I'm a Husky, and and in the University of Washington, we specifically have built a relationship over the last 10 years with Tsinghua University, which is the top Chinese technical university, and we built a joint innovation entrepreneurship program with them that was just launched. We built a massive campus in Bellevue, Washington, and basically the goal. It is a threat, but also there's an opportunity if we can figure out how to partner and work together and create some friendlies, and that's one attempt. So we have high hopes for that. It's a huge lift, and when I went to the launch up in Seattle, I think they sent 2 747s worth of students and teachers over to help christen this thing, and so we're hopeful that we'll not just be playing defense. We're hopeful that we can find some opportunities to collaborate.
So building on the last question and Chuck's from before, I wanted to ask what your thoughts were where there may be things, whether it's policy, whether it's culture, whether it's capital, that we need to do differently in this country, or at least in this area, in order to really unlock these changes. And I'll give one analogy to build a thinking of autonomous city or elements, but one connection. If you look at genomics today, and you look at precision medicine, and you take one individual who may be fighting their own battle with cancer, it is extremely challenging to actually implement precision medicine as an individual today. It's crazy when you look at the technology, when you look at the state of the science, everything we talk about that's possible, but if you're on the ground with that one individual, it is a battle where you cannot get your data, you can't share your data, and it is really hard trying to actually implement what we all talk about as being possible. And so it's this juxtaposition of opportunity and challenge. And so when you think about that in the context of software and AI, are there things holding us back that if we, whether it was privacy or whether it was funding or our policy, are there things we need to embrace or let go in order to really allow the change to take place?
Well, I'll say a few things. This area of precision medicine or personalized medicine is fascinating, but yes, our current healthcare system does not support that.
So
it has major potential, tremendous advantages for society at large in terms of personalizing care, delivering better care, probably even lowering the costs of care overall because you don't waste your time on the wrong things. But it's been struggling with healthcare policy my whole life, and it's a very complex area that's very politicized. Other things are a lot more open. The DARPA, the government, the military has invested a lot of money in artificial intelligence because they saw the benefits for what they're interested in. And so there's been a lot of money coming into artificial intelligence. We at Brain Corporation had an original grant from DARPA to do some work, which was, it's an interesting thing taking military funds, so it's a little different. So I think the government is investing in it, and there are a lot of things they are changing about, the cars that can drive and the rules, and who can drive on public roads with autonomous vehicles. But I think the most interesting thing is if you could stop now and fast forward about 20 years and look back, we're in the middle of a major industrial revolution. The effects,
the fourth industrial
revolution, the effects of artificial intelligence, artificial neural networks, it's going to touch every part of so many things that we do, and it's just a matter of where you look to where you find it. It touches legal services, travel agencies, advertising, HR, for us, janitorial services. Almost anything you can think of will eventually have some kind of automation introduced. And so, yes, the greater, I think we do need public policy changes, but there are some areas that are opening up.
Yeah. And I want to just add I agree with everything you said. I want to add something else. Look, I think one of the bottlenecks very specifically to machine learning and AI, outside of sector or regulation, is actually talent. So today, the people that have studied machine learning and artificial intelligence, most of them are actually still at universities. Most of the people that are going to be game changing, or they've already been plucked out by Google or Facebook, but it really is a talent component. Talking, about this deal that Brian and I are working on right now, and it's a horizontal, we've got two teams. Horizontal AI is a best way to describe it. And one very successful entrepreneur, but frankly he hasn't been educated in machine learning and AI. The other is more of a research professor that has spent his career developing this. And I think frankly we're more inclined to go with the research professor than the executive from some other tech space, because it is so critical that there are going to be a few people that are going to actually unlock the next big movements. So I think it's actually a talent gap. My studying machine learning pretty soon. Al Gore invented that as well.
There's a category of technologies that I would describe, has been described as general purpose technologies. Blockchain, cryptocurrency is an example of that. AR, VR, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, that's an example of that. Clean energy is an example. Artificial intelligence. These are categories of general purpose technologies that increasingly will touch each other. They'll begin to sort of integrate with each other to deliver the future. I think blockchain in particular is a very interesting ledger technology. I don't know what's going to happen with the rest of cryptocurrencies, but I think blockchain has a lot of potential, in my humble opinion here. On the broader question though of how we deal with this concept, I want to touch a minute on the healthcare thing before we move too far from it. Every 5 years or so, the top of the S&P or the top mobile operating systems, every category, they turn over every 5 to 10 years, and they turn over because some force comes and disrupts them. They don't try to compete with them because you can't. They're embedded, they're structural. As you're saying, the incumbents are going to play defense. Something's going to come over the top. And when I think about healthcare and the whole data quagmire, one of my thoughts is that eventually somebody's going to come forward with a model that says, hey, look, there's going to be value in more and more people sharing their data, all of their data, making it available. And we're going to make a bargain with you. We're going to say, we're going to go on this journey, we're going to accumulate all this data, and we're going to be able to, solve big problems. And if you participate in giving your data and allowing us to use it within some bounds, we're going to give you a fraction of the benefit that comes down the road. And by that, creating a critical mass of people who are freely sharing their data, freely making it's going to take something like that, because the traditional stuff, it's just not going to work. It's going to have to be some game-changing new model that gets us over this hump. So just an idea.
From the healthcare side, a couple of things that came to mind as you were talking. One is that I remember when we first got into, this idea of getting into a regulated space, right? And everybody was like, oh my God, the FDA, stay away from the FDA. Don't do anything if the FDA is involved. And I was like, I'll talk to the FDA, let's have a chat. And so I did, and I reached out to them early on. And what was really interesting, you talk about timing in different industries, and right now the FDA is making a lot of changes. They're not only pushing change. Maybe a nice way to say it is they're sick and tired of the manual processes as well, because it makes things very difficult for them. But I think when we're looking at the data you were talking about, a lot of these big players coming together and deciding we're going to share data, that's starting to happen already. There's a initiative, Yoda, through Yale, that's bringing together some of the top tier pharma companies that are sharing data. So you think because, when your boot's on the ground and I'm talking to these folks, things are happening. People are equally frustrated with the lack of transparency, with the inability to share data. And I think it's happening maybe even more so than what the general population is seeing. So I think in healthcare, this is a really pivotal time. And it's a great time. I know, like I said, I reached out to the FDA early, and I've been pushing. Every time we talk about what we're going to do, it's never how do we digitize the current processes. It's how do we change the way it's done today, because the way it's done today is not the right way.
Let me add something else, much as healthcare. I think that these newer technologies, artificial intelligence, they create tremendous productivity and efficiency in the products that come out of this. And the history of this kind of thing in the last 150 years has been that the companies that embrace this actually do very well, and the ones who kind of are standoffish ultimately kind of don't make it or don't get the productivity gains. So I think some of it, to some extent, is self-correcting. But I definitely agree. We definitely have a shortage of programmers. I'm told that if you go on the website for Google and Amazon, if you have these kinds of skills, it's just like checking the boxes. So yeah, that's probably the one thing we can really do. But I think you're going to see a lot of change in the next 5 years about more and more of this, and I think that it's a natural. It has to happen.
So the message is, if your kids haven't declared a major, this is good job security. There was a question back here I want to get to.
Brian and I spoke earlier briefly, but how do you see this changing automotive manufacturing, distribution, and retail?
And he owns a car dealership, so be careful what you say.
Well, I think it's a fascinating question, quite honestly. I think it's a matter of who buys the cars. You still need a car to get around. So that, if you're selling cars, you're selling them to somebody. So somebody's buying these cars. You're not going to magically get from point A to point B. I think we will see autonomous vehicles come around, but they still are cars. They're just cars of a different nature. They have other electronics in them. And so I think that the Ford working with Uber, and this is a very interesting development. So I think like any other industry, there's changes, but if you think about the changes, there's probably great opportunities to be successful. That's my opinion. I'm not in the car business, but that's what I would think.
We've obviously spent a lot of time because of our investments in the space, and we by no means have it all figured out. But it's interesting to hear one of our analysts, went and did this macro research, and I'm going to overly simplify. He's like, look, I can't give you the time frame, but here's what's going to happen. Like cars, there'll still be a percentage of people that's like, I love my Porsche or I love my Ferrari. Like it's a collectible, it's a piece of art. But cars are going to become a commodity.
Huh? You're talking about Rob, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There'll still be, and we're not we're the upper percent. So our buying habits may not be representative. But his point was, cars are going to actually become a commodity, and this whole idea of autonomization, like you're not going to really care what the brand is. Like you're just going to. Something's going to be there. You probably won't even own one. I sold my car a year ago, so now I still have a family car, but I just Uber everywhere. So this idea that it's commoditization and it's more based on uses. So I want a gaming car or I want a business car, as opposed to I want a Ford or I want a GM. It's more, how are you going to use your time in that commodity? So it's the recreation or the business or whatever it may be, the use case.
That's a huge deal, which is, if you don't own the car, if you don't own the vehicle, and it's a purpose-built thought that appears when you need one, then what is the experience within that vehicle? You know, what is the experience when you are, if you're going to work, it might be more of a productivity experience that you're looking for. If you're going for entertainment, you're going for recreation, it's a different kind of experience. And the systems that are being designed and built, the big battle that's going on now between Apple, Tesla, you know, all the different players they're really trying to get ahead of the game and thinking about what part of the ecosystem do they want to be in. Do they just want to be in the entertainment systems, or do they want to actually vertically integrate and control everything from selling the fleet to managing, doing administration, and all of the stuff that's important with if you have a fleet. There's a lot of taxes and use taxes and parking meters and the toll roads. How do you make all of that stuff automatic and frictionless? And so, you know, that is there's an enormous amount of money. We all hear about the LiDAR and the systems being able to sort of, you know, just auto drive the car, but I actually think there's a as big, if not bigger, battle going on around what is the experience within the vehicle. I think that's going to be really interesting. There's going to be a lot of money made and lost there. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, just next.
How does the program decide if you're driving down the road and a van with kids in it pull out in front? Do you sacrifice the vehicle off the side of the road?
I can answer this. We spent a lot of time with the team at Uber about this. Software companies aren't going to decide that. Software companies are going to implement the rules, like state, federal, whatever it is. There would be governmental bodies that will take, you know, the opinion of, as our elected officials, that will make those rules. The software will just implement it. So of the tech companies as the delivery mechanism, not the decider of that.
And then the legal system.
The system that we've all put in place, whether or not we agree that it's working today or not, right? That system will decide it, and then their software will just implement it.
Who ultimately is the insurable party or the underwriter of the insurance will be the one? Is it, you know, is it the manufacturer? Is it that decision will be made there, and the ethicist will play, and policy will eventually arrive.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be determined by policy. Rob, you had a question? Let's give it to Brian, since he brought it up earlier. It's a hard one.
Yeah, well, I think
are on the line.
Exactly, exactly. I think, Rob, you have to look beyond the initial shift, right? Several of my colleagues up here have made the comment that, okay, a shift occurs and then 5 years later something else happens. I don't even think it's that long that. So take this warehouse example, right? I talked about, you know, warehouse automation. It could be that day one, there's a percentage of the workforce at that particular DHL warehouse who used to be, you know, marching boxes across the warehouse. They're no longer doing that, but it doesn't mean they're out of a job. It means the nature of their job has shifted. Maybe they're moving packages over a much shorter or safer distance, or maybe they're part of the warehouse automation team that's helping to provide, you know, the human input to the rules. Just as there would be rules for cars on the road, there are rules for how these robots are to function. So I don't think of it as a single transaction of, oh God, that guy's no longer has that job of moving the boxes through the warehouse. I think of it as, well, what's the other opportunity for him or her after that shift happens? And there's been a lot of studies done, including by the US Department of Labor, of the impact of AI. And if you play it out far enough, There's been plenty of studies that have shown there's going to be an increase in jobs. But I think similar to how a lot of people think about wealth in society, it kind of bifurcates things where you have the sort of high-skilled alphas, which is what everybody's been talking about. If you can program an AI or machine learning, there's 25 jobs for every skilled person. It's a good place to be. And then there's sort of the, the B class, which is the non-skilled laborers, or a lot less of a skilled job. Correct. Yeah, exactly. The art major. So I think you're driving a bifurcation, but I don't think you're necessarily eradicating jobs entirely from the workforce. I just think it's going to look different. So take this car example of, I think people will be buying Escalades from you for many years, right? But there is a percentage of the population, they don't need to own something. We were talking earlier, there's a company you guys should look at called TesLoop, T-E-S Loop, one word. Go to the website, TesLoop.com, take a fleet of Teslas, and it's basically to get people from San Diego to Newport Beach to Los Angeles. They don't want to own a car, they don't want to fill it up with gas, they don't want to deal with insurance and parking and registration. They want to go into an app, not too dissimilar from Uber, but the experience they want, they like Teslas. And they're going to sit in the back seat. She may be a passenger in the same Tesla. We're both going from Newport Beach to downtown Los Angeles. I get out at the other end. I don't have to park the thing. I don't got to worry about insurance. I don't got to remember where I put it. I don't have to refill it with, fuel of any kind. So I think there's a lot of shifts in the way that, so you could sit here and say, okay, well, maybe we're not going to make as many Escalades as we did before, but there's going to be a lot of jobs to provide these newer vehicles and these newer services. So you have to look at what's beyond the initial impact.
I was also reading an article recently, and it was talking about, the folks, what does it look like, in the future of AI? And it was interesting that you mentioned the artists in those, because they said that those actually had the likelihood that they would lose jobs was a lot lower. And so like the empaths, like empathy skills, critical thinking skills, those kinds of jobs are still going to be available, according to these folks that had written this article. So it was interesting to kind of, because I was thinking that too, like what does it actually look like? I wanted to talk to George Jetson, but he wasn't available, so of course I had to read this article.
Yeah, I agree that those jobs will be actually available in increasing numbers given the demographics of our country. We're getting older. The challenge will be, and I'm going to be a little bit more dark, is long-term I'm optimistic. I'm absolutely optimistic. I think the wealth that could be created, the improving of overall standards of living, longer-term good. The challenge is going to be handling the disruption, the velocity, the speed of the change within the window that we have to adjust. And it's really difficult to get people to sort of change their way of thinking, their role from one thing to the other. For instance, there will probably be a lot more jobs available taking care of older folks and even taking care of younger folks. A lot more of those jobs. But that requires, particularly for men, a change in their mindset about what is meaningful work, what really is meaningful work. For most of us, we won't have that issue. Even for your kids, you're going to send your kids off to university. They're going to go get those STEM degrees and be able to participate in the economy where AI is augmenting the work that they do, and they'll have the skills to compete. But for a lot of other folks, they won't make that transition, and we are going to have a challenge with not having at least what those folks have historically thought of as meaningful work. Getting people to change their view of what meaningful work is, culturally, sociologically, that's hard. And so I don't know what the period of time is, but we could see a window 30 years where, we're challenged. And that's my concern is that. Long term, we'll adjust, we always do. But then there's a generation or so of folks, could be tough.
Maybe one final topic, and we'll let everybody provide a point of view and welcome it from the audience. But everyone here is obviously interested in investing, otherwise you wouldn't be friends with Hollencrest. But I guess if each of you has, I'll start with you, Bill, any advice for people, whether it's public markets or private markets, any advice to these folks, how should they be thinking about artificial intelligence as they look at investment opportunities?
Sway Ventures has an open fund. We do co-investments as well. No. I think I go back to this idea that it cuts across everything. So I think it can cut across, if you think about the portfolio allocation that our good friends at Hollencrest do, I mean, it really can touch all asset classes. And whether it's Google on one far end to a hedge fund that's using machine learning to actually try to pick up momentum trades, I really think that it's going to be something that's going to cut across everything. So the big question is, do you believe it's going to be one of the 5 or 10 drivers as we think about a big monumental shift over the next 25 years? SoftBank, which is, it's interesting, I'm going to tie this into what they're doing. SoftBank's view, those of you that have read it over the weekend, we do some co-investing with them. We actually cut back their allocation. They want to put too much money to work. But they're taking a 200-year view with their latest fund, right? So they're just saying software is going to be the key driver over 200 years. So if I break it down just even smaller, is do you think machine learning and AI will be a key driver? And if so, go try to pick companies across an entire portfolio that will do it. I would say it's very specialized in being able to understand teams that can actually apply it both vertical and horizontal is my only caveat, right? If I were to kind of give you what Ken's saying, like, what keeps me up at night, I'm not a life science investor. I go give money to the experts that are going to go pick my life science AI. I don't try to do that because if it's more like I might as well just go to Vegas. So I'd say, find your experts, and Hollencrest are great at a top level. They're there to find the experts that are going to apply it, because it is a very narrow field in both in investors and operators.
Yeah. So this is the hard question about kind of where do you go for value? For me, it's you would target those areas that are most ripe for disruption. So I've taken on a couple of fintech companies. I've joined those boards because A, I want to learn, B, because they asked me, and it's kind of a marriage where they're saying, okay, something about technology, and we know we need to. So I generally think the financial services industry is, much like healthcare is there's been very little real innovation. And blockchain and cryptocurrencies are both a threat and maybe an opportunity, but that's where I'm spending some time thinking about it. Healthcare is the other. That's an obvious one, and so I'm putting a little bit of money in some things that I think where AI could disrupt healthcare. So those are the two big ones for me. The fight. I'll throw one other one out there that actually I also am spending time and money on is. The marriage over time between virtual reality and augmented reality, not for entertainment per se, but for driving change in the workplace, where it's being used to allow people to do their work better, more specifically, to get insights that they couldn't get before. That's where I think that the entertainment thing isn't as interesting to me, but driving productivity, reducing friction, AI, AR, and VR there, I think, has a real opportunity.
To Ken, sorry, just because I know it's a subset, but I think it's important to bubble it up, tying back to this theme. Ken touched on this, a university initiative that we had. I guarantee if I gave Ken $1 million to know the answer, he's going to go invest it in companies coming out of universities. I think specific to this, because what we were saying, like this talent is so deeply enrooted in research and is now just hitting the forefront. There are a lot of great companies that are coming out of some very specific universities that are research professors. So you're going to get, your loss ratio is obviously going to be high, but those true game changers, there really are only like out of all the bright engineers, there's like a fraction of a percentage of those engineers that can do real meaningful stuff versus just going to Google's open API and getting machine learning algorithms and applying it for real estate.
And I'll just give you an example. When my investment partner and I were thinking about our next big thing, and we said, okay, you know, machines are going to have to know how people feel. What are the technologies that would allow us to do that? And we did a bunch of research to figure out who was smart, who knew something about this. And it turned out there were 6 research professors at the University of UCSD, an intact team, 6 PhDs. We're the best in the world. And we did this very quantitatively and by a factor of 4.2, most cited, most published. And that's what Emotion was. And those are the places where the deep minds are right now. The people that are at the corporations are pretty good, but you can't afford them. They're, you know, Google, Facebook, you can't compete for those people. But there's some really smart people who are at universities who don't yet know how valuable they are. So. Completely agree.
I have one question for the VR guys. We talked about the medical industry, tough to crack. It has its own protocols, but it'll happen, I believe that. The other one is the banking industry. And you as VR guys, how do you see this? We have a centralized fiat currency where you raise your money from, but the Asian countries are way ahead of us, okay? Because they are pushing decentralized funding. China especially, Korea is way ahead of us. Do you ever see the possibility of decentralized currency for your businesses?
ICOs. It's happening right now. You know, with people being able to go on and basically raise money. Now, they'll probably be regulated soon, but there are already folks raising money on you know, these ICOs right now.
It can be attempted to be regulated, but it's structured in such a way that it probably won't be completely regulated. I see it as a huge opportunity, a massive opportunity to make people around the world aware of what's going on and have these opportunities that may only be available for certain select individuals.
Yeah, actually, I'm not. There is a lot of activity in that. I do think that the SEC at some point is going to come in because the SEC's role is to protect investors. So I don't really know. I think it is very interesting. I've studied it a lot, trying to understand. I don't own any bitcoins of any nature personally, but it is interesting to see where it'll go. Certainly, there are a lot of other creative ways that people are, you know, the SEC's let up and letting people raise X amount of dollars, kind of mini IPOs and all these different kinds of things. So I don't know. We'll see where that goes. But blockchains are fascinating concept.
Absolutely are, and it may
They're
be
fascinating.
that the federal government decides to enter into the fray and buy several $1 billion worth of ultra high-speed mining machines and gets into the business.
Right. They got out of the gold business, but they might get into the bitcoins. It's possible.
All right, Kim, any final thoughts?
I'm just fascinated, kind of getting sucked into the dialogue. Yeah, I mean, I think that for when you're looking at investment opportunities, obviously, I'm biased, so healthcare, hello. And of course, I mean, I think I echo the same, you know, the finance space. I went into a Bank of America recently to do some transactions, and I thought, okay, I've always said that healthcare is the most painstaking, problematic space, but I'm gonna have to jump over here.
Yeah. Banking.
I was like, wait a minute. Once we crack this nut, I'm gonna fix that one next. No, but yeah, I guess I echo what everyone else has said.
There's one other connection between VR and healthcare that we should mention. It's in the Sway portfolio. It's a company called Applied VR, which basically builds content in an immersive environment to mitigate pain various forms of pain and mania. So, and the trials are going very well. They're testing well. So if you think about a burn victim
in revenue.
Yeah, in revenue. Burn victim who is obviously going through pains, and finding that they can treat pain with immersive content that might sort of place someone in the Arctic, as an example. And there's other examples for other forms of, whether it's depression or other things, where they're finding that, and when we have this opioid sort of thing going on where people are getting over-medicated, finding alternative ways to treat pain is a really big deal, and it feels like they're onto something. They're at the biggest Cedars-Sinai and some of the biggest institutions. Their trials and their results have been very positive. So,
a therapy using sound frequencies. So you put this helmet on your head, and it helps tremendously with depression. And I've known one person who was suicidal. It's absolutely changed his life.
So you're also going to see it with PTSD, VR. And that's going to be a major advance. And I think there's a lot of research on that. Just to echo what Ken said, I think that there'll be a lot of opportunities in investing in companies that embrace artificial intelligence. And just, what I always say is it could just be anything. It could be fintech. It could be, people with, behavioral insights. Could be bioinformatics. Anybody who really embraces it, it's worthy of looking at and thinking about just how disruptive it will be and what are the upsides. But I do think that other traditional businesses will continue to do well as well, and shouldn't be the only thing people invest in.
All right, we're gonna our panelists eat their lunch. They're gonna be around, so if you guys want to interact with any and all of them and continue the discussion, we'd encourage that. Most of them got here on an airplane, so we appreciate their sacrifices to travel and be here for this. So how about a hand for these guys? Rob, you want to close it out for us?
I don't know that I have anything too profound or meaningful to say, other than thanking our panelists and thanking all of you for your time. I think it was an interesting discussion that I know I personally kind of heard of some different angles that I hadn't really thought about. So I want to thank Bill and Brian for hosting us and your generosity here, and appreciate all of you panelists carving time out of your day to spend time with the audience here. So thank you.